Hi, I'm Pranamya and you're watching Pages of the Globe. So if you're new to my channel, I essentially read stories. I will tell you a little bit about the author, a little bit about the historical context of the story, and then I'll read it to you. And then I'll give you an in-depth analysis of what happened, what are the themes, what are the symbols, what are the motifs, how does this relate to what is happening now today, what type of social or societal commentary is the author trying to show us, what are the subtle or not so subtle messages that are intertwined within the story. I've also read some poems on here before, but if you want to know more, feel free to check out the pinned video that is on my channel. But without further ado, let's get on with the video. So the story that I will be reading to you today is called The Pain Addict by Valda, which is a pseudonym for Penn Jillette. So this story is a very interesting story. It's a very dark, provocative short story that explores the boundaries of empathy, technology, and human suffering. It imagines a future where essentially any pain can be transmitted, experienced, or even consumed, and it raises very unsettling questions about morality and entertainment. Now, if this kind of seems familiar to you, or you feel like you've heard of this before, it's probably because there is an episode in Black Mirror that this is actually based off of, specifically season 4, episode 6. I've never watched the entire series of Black Mirror, but I have watched some episodes, and I will say it's very interesting. Each episode is essentially, it has a lot of powerful social commentary, and it is a highly acclaimed sci-fi anthology series. If you are anyway interested by this story, then I would totally recommend that you check out the series. But there is an episode called Black Museum where there's this doctor who gets addicted to pain, and it was actually based on a short story by Penn Jillette. So Charlie Brooker had lunch with him and he discussed the idea, and this story was published back in 1988, and it's very short. It's 5 pages long, but it was very, very to Charlie Brooker, I guess it was very interesting, and it was kind of what inspired him for this episode. So who is the author Valda? Valda is a pseudonym for a man named Penn Jillette, and he was born in Massachusetts in 1909. I believe his pseudonym comes from his mother's name. His mother's name was Valda Rudolph Jillette, so I'm assuming that's where his name comes from, or his pseudonym. But he is known as an American magician, actor, comedian, musician, inventor, television presenter, and author, and he's best known for his work with fellow magician Teller as half of the team Penn and Teller. So actually, I did not know who this was before, but when I was doing my research on him, I found out that he is actually kind of famous, but not for his his author work at all, actually. This short story is kind of popular, but only amongst Black Mirror fans because it inspired a Black Mirror episode. Otherwise, he's not some type of acclaimed author, I guess. But he is most known for being a part of his magician duo as Penn and Teller. Now, he has actually published 8 books, including the New York Times bestseller, God Knows, Signs You May Already Be an Atheist and Other Magical Tales. He is known for his advocacy of atheism, scientific skepticism, the First Amendment, as well as identifying as a libertarian, a position he disavowed in 2020. So there's not that much information about him. I would say a lot of the stuff I found was not super pertinent to what the story is actually about. So I'm just going to move on from here. Without further ado, let's just get on with the story. If you would like me to read another story, make sure you comment, subscribe, and yeah, let me know what story you would like me to read next. The Pain Addict by Valda. It was the answer to every student's dream, learning without studying. It seemed too good to be true, and it was. But it came closer to working than anyone expected, and it gave birth to sympathetic diagnostics, a whole new branch of medicine. The idea was very simple. If thought consists of patterns of electrons zipping through the synapses of the brain, why not just teach those patterns and not bother with the words? The words could come later. After having these patterns implanted in your head, you would still have to learn the terminology, but the "oh, I get it," the aha experience would already be there. Subject 1. The teacher thinks about algebra. The patterns are picked up, digitally encoded, travel through some wire, decoded, amplified, and popped into the brain of Subject 2, the student. Subject 2 spends a week reading about Venn diagrams and null sets and bingo, Algebra 101 in a week. Well, the first problem was it took an operation to get to the learning centers of the brain, and the student rat still didn't know the maze. He was just a quick study. He didn't know which way to turn in the maze. He didn't even know he was going to get food. Aptitude is not knowledge. A day late and $1 short of the academic revolution. The same device, hooked up between two pain centers, however, worked perfectly. You could torture two rats with one soldering iron. The pain centers in the brain are easy to hook up, right near the surface. Sensitive pickups and a bit of amplification, and you didn't even have to make a slice. Shave the head, grab some glue, and two minds suffer as one. My timing was perfect. They'd done the experiment with humans. The convicts and the students had shared pinpricks. The governments had realized it was still easier to beat the shit out of bad guys directly, and I was out of medical school. So the first sympathetic diagnosticians were born. This is how it worked. If a patient came in with a pain in the abdomen, possible appendicitis, we would simply shave a little spot on his head and hook up the gizmo. I would hook myself up. I kept a little spot shaved all the time. Tuned myself in and I could feel the pain. The tuning was like an old-time radio. I'd give the patient's finger a little pinprick and turn the dial until I felt it in my finger. With the patient hooked up and the gizmo tuned in, a diagnosis was easy. I had felt the pain of the appendicitis 1,000 times, so a quick push on the right spot and, yup, it's appendicitis, no hurry though, it's still minor. Never before had doctors been able to be pure macho. The guys all doubled up over, felt like a real wimp. I'd be feeling the same pain as he and not flinching. I loved it. I diagnosed injured Olympic athletes and boxers fresh out of the ring. Even childbirth couldn't make me wince. I even liked the fashion, reverse Hare Krishna. Every morning I'd shave the little spot on my head. A lot of the SDs wore hats in public, not me. In the summer, I would tan where I stuck my disc. The kind of person who doesn't mind coming in Monday morning, a little hungover, and feeling a compound fracture and a concussion in the first half hour. I was that kind of person. I loved it. I would feel the full pain of a construction worker burned on 3/4 of his body and flirt with the nurse at the same time. I became spiritually strong. There was a little knob on the gizmo, right next to the tuning, that was like a volume control. The idea was you kept it where you could feel the pain enough to diagnose it, but you would never have to suffer. I kept mine on full. Turn it up. I wanted to feel every nuance. After 2 years in the emergency room, I was bored. Every once in a while, a traffic accident would yield some new jolt, but for most of the part, emergency rooms are filled with hypochondriacs and crybabies. I was sick of their pain. That's when I first heard about the work being done with very young children. As a child, I had suffered with an undiagnosed hernia for almost 2 weeks. That was always a problem for pediatricians. Babies couldn't tell you where it was, let alone how. Sympathetic diagnostics was going to be a real boon, so the SDs found what those kids were crying about, and there was a lot to cry for. Babies feel pain loud and clear. They haven't learned to control that pain at all. The nerves on a baby are brand spanking new and work very well. Kids hurt. Consequently, a lot of pediatric SDs were turning down the volume and misdiagnosing the little beggars. They knew it hurt, but not exactly how much, how, and where. The first time I hooked up to a kid, it was like I'd never felt pain before. Even tuning in the pinprick was excruciating. It was pure, unadulterated hi-fi pain. Jesus Christ, diaper rash alone felt like a second-degree burn. And the double hernia the kid had, I could not believe. I saw colors. I nearly passed out. When I felt that hernia, I found a lost part of my childhood, a part I'd hidden from myself for over 30 years. I didn't need my medical training to tell me it was a double hernia. I knew right away, but I kept quiet and kept my fingers on the volume. Turn it up, louder, louder. I was on full volume in a month, full volume on a 6-week-old burn victim. We know the poor little thing is burned. I don't think we need a diagnosis. Right, nurse, but let me check quickly in case there are any complications. I enjoyed my work and I got praise. Time magazine said, willing to suffer the pain to end it. Willing? How I lived to feel the pain. I needed to feel the pain. Within a year, I had a grant to work with terminal cancer victims, mostly children. The grant proposal was brilliant. Pinpoint and describe the pain as the first step to new treatments and relief. I would have paid to be in that ward. I had to be careful. I couldn't let the other doctors or nurses see me hooked up to a patient for too long. There was already the feeling that the sympathetics were a little weird. We weren't regular doctors. They'd look at my shaved patch and make the same boring joke. That was hard having to unhook. You couldn't remember pain. So once the machine was switched off, there is nothing, emptiness for a few seconds, and then like a fog of mosquitoes, my little insignificant problems would land on, one by one. Did I mail out my visa payment? I feel a little bit of back strain. How can I get out of dinner with Bill? I had to make sure no one was looking when I unhooked, because I would often cry softly and look like my dog had just died. It was during the cancer ward time that I started to go to church often, real church. Catholic, Lutheran. I didn't believe any more than I used to, but now I understood. I wish that they still did the Mass in Latin. I never liked the sermon parts, but I liked the solitary reverb on the voice, and I loved looking at Jesus on the cross. I knew that forgive them expression on his face. I always wanted to hook up to him. Those first 4 hours, hand, side, head. You see, no one else understood Jesus the way I did. He had suffered for us. I could suffer for them. I tried to play with my gizmo without a subject. I tried hooking it up to animals. I even tried a little bit of straight signal electricity right to my pain centers. Not good, not art. No subtlety, and more important, no meaning. Noise, not music. And I've always loved loud, dissonant, grating music, but I could never stand noise. Even feedback is music if someone in control is listening. Pain is music, and the body and soul are their composers. Straight random signal meant nothing. Skin cancer in a child, that meant something. I couldn't read minds with my machine, but feeling the pain, I could always get a good healthy jolt of the fear. Now, it's confession time. I was walking home from the clinic one night and I saw a man. He was really bloody. He had been cut badly. I ran over to him and told him I was doctor. I pulled out my gizmo and shaved him. I didn't even call a goddamn ambulance. I hooked him up, broken ribs, broken nose, lacerations of the upper abdomen. I'd felt it all before. But never alone with a helpless patient. I was cool. Let me see if this is broken. Does this hurt? Does it hurt? How does it hurt? Where does it hurt? I was punching this man in the ribs. He wouldn't pass out. He just kept feeling. And it was a new pain, fresh pain, nearly virgin pain. The police saw me beating on him and pulled me off. If the rib penetrates the heart, he'll be dead. Get the hell out of my way, I'm a doctor. The cops didn't know. The guy lived and thanked me for saving his life. I was caught red-handed by the police punching an open wound just to create pain, and I was thanked. I was a doctor. I'm just writing this to let you know that what I was feeling was not some perversion. Now, in this section of the story, it describes some rather graphic material, so I will be skipping over it. But essentially, it is just him trying to explore, again, another person's harm, except he doesn't believe it's bad enough. He doesn't feel that it's painful enough. It was that night. I was at the clinic in my office just thinking, running my hands over the gizmo. It looked great. It was beat up, taped up, scratched up. I hooked the disc up. Sometimes if I just kept it on with no subject, I would get a little jolt, current variation, fine-tuning. I said I don't like noise, but sometimes it's better than nothing. But tonight it was nothing, not even an itch. It happened very quickly. I never hooked up to sleeping patients too dull. But I hooked up to a kid in the ward and woke him up. When the nurses found me, I was gouging his eyes out with my fingers. He was going to die from the cancer in a week anyway, but he died that night, and I felt all the pain. The police got there and it was all over. I was still hooked up, but there was no signal. Death, the end of pain. I didn't plead insanity. I wanted regular prison, and I'm going to stay here. They don't stop me from living the way I want. They don't watch me all the time, and there are places on the body where they can't see self-mutilation. Sometimes the old ways are the best. The end. So that was The Pain Addict by Valda Peach. Now, this is such an interesting story. I mean, it was, as I was reading, I was literally getting chills. The story essentially centers around this, groundbreaking medical device that links a doctor's brain to a patient's pain center, and it enables the doctor to literally feel the patient's pain. And it essentially just promises hyper-accurate diagnosis, right? Because if a doctor is able to pinpoint exactly where the pain is, it's easier for them to be able to diagnose it. Whereas oftentimes, as a patient, it's harder for you to tell, and also you're in so much pain sometimes that you can't even feel where it's coming from. So we see that this doctor, he begins with noble intentions, right? He's trying to use the machine to diagnose appendicitis and severe injuries. But he ends up elevating this device into a pain volume control. He's racking it up just to feel every single little nuance. And it shifts from using this for diagnostics into just this masochistic dependency. So he seems to be really, really bored at one point, right? He's like, this pain isn't enough for me. So that's when it comes out hey, there's an even more noble cause or more noble reason you could use this is on kids, because, kids really can't understand, especially kids and babies. I mean, a baby can't tell you where their pain is coming from. So once he starts using his machine on there, he's like, okay, perfect. This is my time to shine, Now I can experiment on infants and terminally ill patients. And feeling pain eventually becomes this craving for him. He tortures and kills 2 different people to feed his need. Not the homeless man, but the guy he meets first. I don't know if he ends up killing him. I don't remember, but he was torturing him. He didn't end up dying. But, he was literally torturing him. And then he actually killed the terminal patient just to fill his need, which is, that's the story's horrific climax. So what are some themes and symbolism we see here? So initially, the device is just a tool to promote empathy and precision. But the doctor's shifting emotional alignment from the caring practitioner to a pain junkie kind of shows that excessive intimate knowledge of another's suffering can corrupt the empathizer. I mean, another big thing we see here is also addiction that is disguised as purpose. So his descent into, I guess, insanity reflects classic addiction patterns. First of all, he's chasing tolerance, he's seeking intensity, he's ignoring moral lines. And the story poses a very interesting question is, can someone become addicted to the pure sensation of pain itself? There is also such a this is very sci-fi, this science and technology that is the way it is being used in the story is so interesting. I mean, the sci-fi premise illustrates a very familiar trope, right? It's technology that's being designed to heal, but somehow it is twisted into a tool for self-indulgence and abuse. And I would say this kind of also shows the ethical irresponsibility of unchecked experimentation, because I feel this is actually a trope we see a lot. Maybe not, it's not going to be, done in this type of way, but this is a trope we see quite often, which is technology that is meant to do something, but instead is being used for bad things. In this case, is being used to fuel an addiction. Now, there's also an interesting part in the story where he talks about how he seeks, the main character talks about how he seeks meaning in Catholic Mass and the figure of Christ, whose suffering he idealizes. But his, twisted route leads to something called nihilism and violence rather than actual redemption. He's not going to church because he feels the need to repent for his sins. Instead, in some twisted way, he is like recognizing, or he is able to make a connection between suffering that he went through and suffering that Jesus Christ went to. Then another theme we see here is moral reflection on suffering. So by escalating the pain in other people, he's beating people up, he's like digging his eyes into people's eye sockets. By doing that, the doctor is mirroring sadistic impulses cloaked in professional detachment. It's this very powerful critique about emotional disconnection and moral erosion. Now, why this story, like I said before, this serves as the basis for the pain addiction segment in the Black Mirror episode, Black Museum, through which there is notable tonal sanitization. I mean, readers repeatedly highlight the creepiness of the doctor's fixation, especially when he experiments on vulnerable children, He talks about how he never hooked up to sleeping patients. As soon as I read that line, I was like, okay, wait, that's not like, he has a line, but then he goes, oh, because, they dull the pain. And so towards the end, what is this final act? I mean, he talks about how he hooked up to a kid, and this kid was like terminal, right? And he begins gouging his eyes out with his fingers. And he says, oh, he was going to die anyway, but he ended up dying that night. And then he says, death, the end of pain, right? So this final brutal act is like a very jarring revelation of just how far his obsession has gone. And it shows how truly insane he has become and how much his addiction has allowed, how this new technology has enabled his addiction. And I think you could say, this could be commentary on a lot of things. It might not be commentary at all. However, I actually very much doubt that. Sometimes I'll see people say things like, oh, you're taking this too deep, like this literature does not mean this, there's no deeper meaning to it. However, I strongly disagree. I think the entire point of literature is for you to read it and then find your own interpretation. And from that interpretation, you find meaning, you find social commentary. And so I would say the same thing for the story. I think this is actually commentary that we see in a lot of sci-fi books, like I said before, which is just technology that is being, like, whenever we try and go out of our limits, we try and create something that is genuinely going to be helpful, it almost always ends up being used for bad. And that is, I think, a good way to end off this video for today. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next.